Hello, everybody. I just wanted to come on and say thank you for listening. I wanted to let you know there are several ways you can support the podcast if you're able. Melody and I greatly appreciate any help. One way that you can support us is to subscribe to the podcast. You can leave us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. You can leave us a review, or you can go on our show notes or ourtimesintruecrimes.com and find our Buy Me a Coffee link. If you buy one coffee, it's like $5. 2 coffees is $10, 3 is $15, and so on. Or you can do a reoccurring $10, $15 a month. And if you can't do anything, that's okay. Thank you for being here. We appreciate you.
The Isles of Shoals, just off the coast of Maine and New Hampshire, are made up of 9 tiny rocky islands. Appledore, Smuttynose, Malega, Duck, and Cedar are in Maine. Star, Longing, White, and Seavey are in New Hampshire. The islands are surrounded on all sides by sometimes perilous sea waters, anywhere from 50 to 100 feet deep. The islands are known for their dark history, a reputation marred by death, an unforgiving and dangerous place with incredible fishing, and it's lured in many daring, adventurous souls since the late 1600s. The famous explorer, John Smith, called them the remarkablest isles. He wrote that on one summer, 24 men caught 60,000 fish in 1 month. Today, the islands are privately owned and no one lives there year-round, but once upon a time, pirate Captain Kidd and Blackbeard made the Shoals their home. Once, Blackbeard was nearly caught at the islands by the British Navy. He was forced to leave with his crew in a hurry when he saw their ships getting closer. He and his crew left in such a hurry that Blackbeard left one of his wives, Martha Herring, on the isle. He sailed to the Carolinas, and according to the legend, Martha waited 15 years for Blackbeard to come and get her. He never showed up, and she died at White Island in 1735 from a broken heart. In 1870, some pirates' hidden treasure were dug up, a clay pot filled with pure silver coins, and some silver bars. The islands were associated with the pirates, poets, shipwrecks, tragic accidents, and one of the most brutal murders in New England's history. So you go ahead and grab yourself a cup of coffee and listen to the true story of the murders of Smuttynose Island.
The sponsor for today's episode is Bold Coffee Company right here in Asheboro. They have given us 2 coffees. Mine is a sugar-free caramel with oat milk.
Mine is a sugar-free cinnamon vanilla latte with oat milk. It's really good.
Okay, mine was really good too.
Yeah.
Which I've never had anything there that wasn't really good.
Me either.
They have just recently reopened up their custom coffee and espresso cart this year. So they will cater high-end espresso drinks for like weddings and baby showers, birthday parties. If you're interested in looking for that, they are now booking those events through December 2024.
Well, I wish I would have known that back in October.
Yeah, I don't know if they were doing it back in October. They've just recently reopened it. So I don't know if they would have been available for your wedding.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it have been cool if they were?
Yes, it would have.
You can find them on Instagram at The Bold Coffee Co. Or you can email them at theboldcoffeeco@gmail.com. Thank you, Bold Coffee Company, for sponsoring today's episode.
And if you go on Facebook and Instagram, you can see their seasonal menu. I think they always have that posted. So thank you. All right. Today we are going to be talking about Smuttynose Island.
That's cute.
Which is the second largest of the shoals. It's only 27 acres. Yeah, really small, huh?
Yes.
And even though Smuttynose is only 6 miles off the coast of New Hampshire, it actually belongs to the state of Maine.
Well, you said Shoals, and my first thought was Muscle Shoals, and that's in Alabama.
Alabama, yep.
So, okay.
Yeah, it belongs to the state of Maine in a town called Kittery in York County. It was given the name Smuttynose a long time ago by fishermen. When they would pass by, they said that with the seaweed sticking out all around it, that it looked like the smutty nose of some big, ugly sea creature. We're going to start our story today with a man named John Hildreth. He was born February 14th, 1842 in Norway. He immigrated from a little town near Larvik, Norway, to the United States somewhere around 1862. He would have been close to 20 years old, and after moving here, John took up work as a fisherman in Boston. Being a fisherman, you know how risky it is even now.
Oh, yeah.
Back then, it would have been even more so. It was very dangerous, backbreaking, exhausting, and in the wintertime, freezing cold and wet, especially in Boston.
I cannot imagine. That is one job I never will understand why anybody would do it.
He was from Norway, and he came from a long line of fishermen. And I guess just like every other profession, some people are just cut out for it.
Yeah.
And John Hildreth was a natural-born fisherman for sure. He'd grown up fishing in Norway and was used to the extreme cold and the treacherous sea. He was a very hard worker, and within 4 years, John had saved up enough money to buy his very own fishing schooner that he named the Clarabella.
I love boat names. Yeah, and they're always named after women, right?
Yeah.
Because that's like a lucky thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. So once he'd saved a little money, had his own fishing business, and was making a decent living, John wrote his parents back in Norway, letting them know that he was ready to get married. In Victorian times, arranged marriages for Norwegians, it was the norm. I think I've said this before, that marrying for love is fairly new.
Oh, yes, yes.
In 1866, 30-year-old Maren Christensen would arrive to the U.S. on a ship with other Norwegian immigrants. On August 17th of that same year, when John was 25 and Maren was 30, they were married. The couple hit it off right off the bat and began a great life together. And she was pretty old, really,
to be getting married at 30.
Mm-hmm.
She would have been called a spinster.
Yeah. The couple lived in Boston together in a boarding house for 2 years. Neither of them really wanted to stay in the city, and especially not in a boarding house. So John, he always had his eye on the future. He was a very good saver, and he just, continued to save. And then in 1868, he and Maren had the opportunity to move north to the Shoals Islands. They were going to be able to live on their very own private island.
Oh, that
Think Gilligan's Island.
Yeah.
They were going to be able to move to Smuttynose, where the population was 2, Maren and John.
Imagine that being your address, too. I live at Smuttynose.
So even today, Smuttynose isn't populated. It's privately owned, and from what I understand, there are some volunteers that keep up the grounds and then the 2 historic houses. I'm sure some of the volunteers stay there, but I don't think anybody permanently lives there because it's just so primitive. Probably a lot like it was when John and Maren were there. It was desolate, but it was absolutely beautiful there. The Hildreths felt so blessed and excited for this opportunity. They didn't really even think twice about isolating themselves. They were surrounded by the sea, but could look into the distance and see mountains. Can you imagine how beautiful that view would have been?
No.
Ocean front, and then seeing the mountains. There were white ledges, grassy slopes, thickets of wild roses, and 2 great big lilac bushes on the property. Even though they'd migrated to the U.S., the Hildreths were able to build a kind of charming Norwegian life for themselves there on Smuttynose. They lived in a red cottage.
That sounds just like all the postcards of Maine that I see.
So I'll show you the house too. This red cottage, it was facing the neighboring island of Appledore, where their nearest neighbors lived. John was thoughtful and always concerned about Maren. He brought her a little dog named Ring to keep her company.
Oh.
She loved that dog, and he followed her around everywhere she went on that island. During picturesque summers, Marin loved taking care of her little garden. She grew ornamental flowers as well as plants and vegetables. She tended her flock of hens and made the most of being outdoors during the warm months. She occupied herself during the long winters, keeping a bright and tidy house. She hung colorful curtains and pictures inside the cottage. She painted the rooms these bright colors and kept plants inside on handmade shelves in the windows.
It sounds so quaint.
It does. Marin did sometimes get lonely when John was far out fishing or hauling his catch to Portsmouth to sell. He came in late a lot of the time, but he made sure that he never left her home alone overnight. And she'd always keep warm food on the stove and a good fire going for when he inevitably came home, which she always very much looked forward to. The introvert in me is loving the sound of a life like that, actually. But you know what? Without a cell phone, I probably can't imagine.
No. I'm sitting here thinking of the weather because right now it's really kind of cold and rainy outside, and that's what I picture the weather being.
You know, I love cold weather, though.
I know. I hate it.
I think I'm weird. All my friends are like, I love spring and summer. And I'm like, yeah, I like dark, cold weather.
So this story's right up your alley.
Yes.
You would have been right at home on Smuttynose Island.
I think I would have been. As much as Marin loved her home and her life with John, she did get terribly lonely, and she desperately missed her family back in Norway. So in 1871, she was ecstatic that her 29-year-old sister, Karen, was immigrating to the U.S. and would be staying with her and John, at least until she found work. But for Karen, the circumstances that led to her move were really sad and heartbreaking. Her longtime lover had either abandoned her or died, and I don't know which, but I know she was left heartbroken.
Okay, so she wasn't married.
She wasn't married, and I heard that this was a live-in lover, which sounds really strange for Victorian times.
That's what I was thinking.
But in Norway, I don't think it was.
Oh, yeah, they're always more liberal
taboo.
in Europe.
Right.
Just kidding.
It's true.
Our European listeners, don't take that the wrong way.
It was just more socially acceptable. But Karen, she was experiencing real deep, dark depression. Marin thought if she could just get her sister over here, the change in scenery would be good for her. And Marin just felt like she could help pull Karen out of the funk she was in. But, poor Karen. There's no ache like a heartache.
So their names were Marin and Karen?
Marin and Karen, yes. After Karen arrived, she spent a little time with her sister, and then right off the bat, she got a job on Appledore Island, which was, like I said, it was the island facing John and Marin's cottage, the largest of the 9 Shoals islands. And there was a hotel or like a resort where rich people would go and vacation, especially during the summer. But of course, the place would have to have help year-round for upkeep. Karen went there to work. She really struggled in the beginning. She was just sad and mourning over this man that she'd lost. She could not speak a lick of English, but she did soon learn enough that she could get by. She proved herself to be an excellent servant, doing her job faithfully and thoroughly. She wasn't beautiful, but she was neat, clean, and attractive. She wore these coarse blue dresses that she wove for herself, and she always topped off her outfit with a white apron with a bow on it and a stiff white collar.
It makes me think of an American Girl doll
Yes,
story. I don't know.
Yes.
I can picture that too.
The daughter of the owner of this hotel would later say Karen would sit by the fire at night, spinning on a spinning wheel that she brought with her from Norway. And while she spun, she would softly sing these sweet, sad old Norwegian songs. The girl, who after she grew up would later say that Karen was unconscious that she was affording such a pleasure to a pair of appreciative eyes.
Oh,
sounds so sweet, doesn't it?
It's just giving me a sense of foreboding.
Most people who lived on the Shoals Island were fishermen. One of these fishermen's names was Louis Wagner. He was a 28-year-old Prussian man who immigrated to the U.S. in 1866 when he was 21. Wagner had grown up working on fishing boats. When he moved to Boston, he would work temporarily on different fishing boats. So he'd go out on board and work for a week or two at a time. And then he'd come inland and stay for about a week and then go out on another boat, which was actually pretty typical of men who didn't own their own boats. John Hildreth and Louis Wagner met the first time when they both lived in Boston in different boarding houses. And then in 1871, Wagner moved to Star Island, which was on Shoals, one of those islands. He had most likely been drawn there from hearing about the Hildreth's success or the success of a select few other fishermen. He did not come there at a great time because it was like if you had your own schooner, you had your own place to live, those people were doing well, but most other fishermen were not at that time, unless they worked for somebody who was doing well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think at one time you could go there and everybody kind of did pretty well, but his timing, it just couldn't have been worse. It was nearly impossible to make a living. Wagner was fishing alone, but he wasn't even making enough to get by. He was forced out of pure hunger to go around visiting neighbors, hoping to score a free meal. The fishermen around the shoals didn't care too much for him, but John actually felt sorry for him because unlike him, who he'd come over and had just a ton of success, Louis, he just couldn't seem to catch a break. He visited the Hildreths quite a bit, and they actually enjoyed his company. Marin always fed him. They just treated him with the utmost kindness always, every time he came. He didn't feel like a burden. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He became like a brother to them. Eventually, John ended up hiring Louis for the fishing season, and he moved in with the couple at Smuttynose in April of 1872. So this would have been about a year after he first came to the Shoals to work. He was supposed to work for John that season, but he hardly went out on the water at all because he was laid up in the bed almost the entire time with rheumatism. The Hildreths were just as kind as they'd always been to him. They made sure he had a place to stay. Marin fed and nursed him. When he was in so much pain, pretty much crippled, she about waited on her hand and foot. Out of 7 months, Wagner only helped John out for about 2 of those months. From the first week of September, he started being able to get out of bed, and he worked until the first week of November.
We'll be back after a quick break.
For the past few years, I've been struggling with unwanted facial hair around my mouth and chin, just places that women are not supposed to grow hair. It's been so embarrassing. I have tried everything from tweezing to waxing, plucking. Nothing has worked. In fact, it's only been getting worse. So finally, I decided to try laser hair removal with Tasha over at Lakeside. After one treatment, I cannot tell you the difference it has made. It's just made my everyday life so much easier, not having to wake up before everybody else and make sure that my husband doesn't see what's sprouted overnight. It's given me confidence and, in a way, just given me my old life back. I'm able to be carefree, and I can wake up in the morning and wash my face and go out in public without being embarrassed. If I go on vacation, I don't have to wonder, oh my gosh, did I bring my tweezers? If you struggle with that, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you are struggling with unwanted facial hair, don't wait. Call Tasha Browse over at Lakeside Integrative in High Point at 336-715-0007. It is 100% worth the investment. Tell them Darlene and Melody from Hard Times and True Crimes sent you.
And the rest of the time he was living with them, but not working. And
Right.
Okay.
Right. But this was a temporary living situation because before Louis even came to work for him, John had written to his brother Matthew, Marin's half-brother Ivan, and his new wife Annetta. to tell them that he finally had saved enough and had enough work for them to come to the United States. So what he probably did was he paid for their passage over to the United States in exchange for them working for him for a while.
Okay.
That was pretty common back then, but they would have been happy to do it.
Yeah, because they're getting to America.
Right.
But are they all going to live with them when they come?
Yes. Okay, now let me tell you, this house, it sounds really small, but it's not that small. It's a 2-story house. I'm going to show you, hold on, I'm going to show you a picture.
Okay.
So yeah, they're all going to live with the Honfits, but you can see that cottage was a good size.
I was going to say, I'm surprised it was called a cottage because I mean, it was a lot bigger than the word cottage made me think it was going to be.
Right. We always think of a small little quaint.
Right. I mean, it was not huge, but it's definitely not a small little thing.
It was actually a duplex, believe it or not. It doesn't look like that, but it was set up so there was upstairs and a downstairs on either side. There was a kitchen, a bedroom downstairs, and then you go upstairs and there was another bedroom.
So not each side had a kitchen, or did it?
No, not each side had a kitchen. I'm sorry.
So that was downstairs, and then there were living quarters upstairs.
Right.
Gotcha.
Whenever Wagner stayed there, he stayed on one side upstairs, and then the Honfits stayed on the
other side.
On the other side. They stayed on the right side, with the kitchen and all that, because of course Marin was doing all the cooking.
Okay.
Yeah. Matthew, Ivan, and Annetta were coming to stay with Marin and John. They were going to live and work alongside them. And the Honfits had always looked forward to the time when they could bring their families over to live with them. You can imagine they were alone on that island.
Yeah, I would hate that.
Yeah.
And I would think, because of the immigrant situation, like you come and you stay with whoever is already here until you can get started.
Exactly. And that's exactly how it was then. And even though Marin had Karen there, and she did come often, she came and visited quite a bit, but still she didn't live with her.
Right.
They were really looking forward to bringing their families over, and John had always promised Marin they would do this as soon as possible. I'm not sure when Matthew arrived, but in October of 1872, Ivan and Annetta arrived. So Matthew is John's brother, Ivan is Marin's brother, and Annetta is Ivan's wife.
Yeah.
Ivan and Annetta had only been married since Christmas, so almost a year, and they were deeply in love. Ivan was tall.
Then they need their own place.
Yeah, exactly. Ivan was tall, blonde-haired, kind of quiet and serious. Annetta was young, always happy and smiling. She had thick blonde hair that was so long when it wasn't braided, she could sit on it. She had blue eyes and a fresh, gorgeous complexion. She was like a ray of sunshine. Everybody, Marin, they all loved her. Marin was completely happy now with her family around her. She welcomed them all with open arms and did everything she could to make a happy life there for them on Smuttynose. She was just very hospitable anyway. I don't know. It just reminds me of like some Norwegian story. I can just imagine them all being so happy on that island. And
yeah,
Louis Wagner ended up, because remember he was staying there, working for John. Well, he was supposed to work for John, but then he had got sick.
And he's kind of like laid up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then he had started to feel better those last 2 months. So he actually stayed on another 5 weeks after Matthew, Ivan, and Annetta arrived. He became pretty well acquainted with them as well, and they all thought a lot of him too. He was like a brother, really, to the whole family.
So they're all getting along.
Yeah, they all got along really well.
So I thought there was going to be some like personality conflicts or something here, but nothing? Okay.
No. I mean, but he couldn't stay forever. The cottage was only so big.
Okay.
And at this time, you got to think John, there's Marin, there's Ivan, Annetta, and Matthew. And then Karen would come and stay from time to time. And then Wagner.
Okay. So I think Wagner's probably going to be getting pushed out soon.
Right. So that November, he did leave the island to go to Portsmouth, where he got a job on another fishing schooner called the Addison Gilbert. And I'm not sure if he was asked to leave or if this had been their agreement the whole time, but there didn't seem to be any ill feelings at all between the family and Wagner. Unfortunately, though, his bad luck continued and the Addison Gilbert wrecked off the coast. And once again, he was out of work, alone, living in a rundown boarding house, behind on rent with no job.
So he's falling on some hard times.
Yeah. He left in November, and then about 4 months later, at about 4 p.m. Wednesday, March 5th, 1873, Louis Wagner happened to be standing on a dock in Portsmouth as the Clarabella, John Honfit's schooner, pulled up. Wagner helped him tie the boat up. He spoke to him, said hello, made small talk with John, Matthew, and Ivan. He asked them how many fish they caught that day. They had done pretty well. They had caught a couple thousand fish.
Oh, that's a lot.
And they were in Portsmouth to sell their catch. And then they were waiting for a train that would deliver bait. Okay. So how the day would go was they would get up really early in the morning. They would have their breakfast, go out on the water, fish. Do you know what a trawl line is? From what I understand, there are like thousands of hooks or something.
Okay.
So they would do that, and then they would go to Portsmouth. They would sell. This is daily. They would sell their catch, and then oftentimes wait for the train to come, and then they would have to bait all that again. So this was a long, hard day. It was getting later, so Wagner asked if John would be going back to the Shoals or if he was going to stay in Portsmouth until the next morning. He asked John that question about 3 times, and John really didn't think anything of it. He never liked leaving the women on the island by themselves, without any of the men there. In fact, this was his plan that day. One of the sisters, Karen, wanted to go to Portsmouth to go shopping. He was going to go by the house after they were finished fishing, pick Karen up, leave either Matthew or Ivan there, and the rest of them were going to go to Portsmouth. But what happened was there was this wind that came in that just made it super easy for them to just go ahead and go to Portsmouth.
Okay.
I don't understand anything about like wind and the boats, but I guess just worked out that way. He was like, no, I'll be home around 10 p.m. And then he asked one of his friends that were there. He said, hey, can you go by the house and let the women know that we are coming? Just explain to them what happened and that we'll be in about 10 p.m. But then another fisherman came up and told John, hey, the train bringing the bait in is running behind and it's not going to be here till about midnight. Yeah. And Wagner was in earshot of that conversation. And when he asked John again, hey, are you still going to go back home? He told him, I don't really have a choice. I'm going to have to stay and wait for the bait. There was just no way he could make it back to the island that night. Not only did John feel bad that the women were going to be there alone, but he'd already sent word for them that he was going to be home at around 10. So they were expecting him. So while Wagner was there, he said, hey, if you want a job tonight helping bait hooks, come on back here and help us. So Wagner agreed that he'd come, but then he did not show up.
I'm getting a bad feeling about him.
Wagner had started to grow bitter over his circumstances. His clothes were almost in rags. He was getting ready to be thrown out of the boarding house that he'd been staying in. He'd been in the U.S. for 7 years and had nothing to show for it. The same amount of time as John had, actually. He was always wondering about John and how much money he made. Back in the fall, when he lived with them, he'd kind of snoop around some and ask John and Marin a bunch of questions about their finances that they really just didn't think anything of at the time. They were very trusting people. Every time John came in from fishing, Wagner would hobble down and ask how many fish they got and what price they sold for. And I do not believe he really had rheumatism. I think he was lazy.
That's what I was wondering that earlier. Like maybe he's just lazy and not a hard worker.
And I'll tell you why I don't believe that in a minute.
And it sounds like he's becoming envious of...
Yeah. And he had fallen on some really hard times. You know, some people that they grow bitter and you think, I see why they have grown bitter. Like they've had some hard knocks in life.
Yeah, but he's living with people who it probably seems like everything's just going great for them.
Right.
So he's probably feeling that a little bit.
But the fact of the matter is that John worked very hard from early in the morning until 10, 11, midnight some nights, every day.
Right, yeah.
And he saved the majority of what he made He worked very hard, saved, got his own schooner, was able to bring family over. So I'm sure it was easy to get envious, and he can't even pay his rent. So anyway, yeah, Wagner was jealous of John. And Wagner actually had told some of the other fishermen that he knew where he could get some money.
Oh, no.
But they really didn't pay any attention to him. By this time, I think everybody just kind of felt sorry for him.
Yeah. And when he says those kinds of things, they're probably thinking, yeah, right, if you did, you would have some money.
Exactly. So that night, Marin, her sister-in-law Annetta, and her sister Karen were all there at the house waiting for the men to come in. They had supper hot and ready. Their neighbor, Emil, okay, I'm probably not going to say, I'm really going to butcher this name, Emil Ingbertson. He let the women know that the men were going to be late, but they'd be there by 10. They stayed up for a while, just laughing, being sisters, having fun. They ate their food. About 10 p.m., they decided they were going to go ahead and go to bed. I mean, they had a lot of work to do, too, the next day.
Yeah, I mean, this is hard life, probably.
Yeah, it was. And like I said, Karen was there, and she normally was not. She had came to spend the night with them, but it was cold upstairs. She normally slept upstairs, but Marin made her up a bed in the kitchen where she could sleep and keep warm by the fire. And then Marin and Annetta slept in the next room. On that March night in 1873, when Wagner learned that John and the other men weren't going to be on the island, he realized that he had an opportunity and he might not have it again. And so instead of showing up to work for John, he stole a rowboat belonging to a man named David Burke, who had just put new thole pins in. Later, when it was picked up, after all this had happened, Lewis's oars had eaten halfway through the pins, which were made of the toughest wood that there is, because in one night, he had to row 9 to 12 miles from the mouth of the Piscataqua River through the harbor to Smuttynose Island.
Wow, that's
why I don't believe. That's why I don't believe he had rheumatoid. Yeah, I'm like, there's no way. It took him 3 hours to get there. Now later, his defense would argue, well, there's no way that a man could do that and get back. And what John would say was, yeah, it was dangerous to do, but I did it many times, and so did a lot of other people.
And I don't know that much about it, but I would think that maybe it just depends on if the wind is blowing a certain way or another. Like if it's blowing at your back and pushing you.
That's exactly what I was going to say. He actually, they said, didn't even have to work that hard that night because it was just perfect conditions. And the moon wasn't, it didn't give him away. Mm-hmm. People couldn't see him. He hardly even had to paddle. I mean, he did have to paddle back. But getting there was pretty easy. So anyway, it took him those 3 hours to make the trip, and he arrived at around 11 p.m. When he got to the island, the women's lamps were still burning. He wanted to wait for them to burn out so that he could be sure, they were asleep. Wagner rowed around to the south side and pulled his boat up on the rocks. We know this because his footsteps going back were found the next day. He walked up to the house and could tell everyone was asleep. It was quiet. There were no lights on. So he walked inside. He knew the house really well. But one thing that he had not thought about was Ring, the dog.
Oh.
And Marin's little dog started barking loud. I'm thinking of Rufus when somebody comes in. And so he's freaking out. Yeah. Wagner just hadn't expected that.
This is going to be one of those stories where he kills the dog, huh?
No,
okay,
actually
good.
He doesn't.
Although I don't want him to kill people either. I'm just saying, I was thinking that was going to be the first thing he did.
But another thing he wasn't banking on was Karen.
Oh, he didn't.
He did not think about her staying there. I think he thought he was just going to come in and rob the place.
Yeah.
But when he walks in, of course, Ring starts going crazy, and then Karen wakes up.
Right.
He probably hadn't even expected her to be there.
So he was expecting 2 women. He's got 3 women and a dog.
Yes. Things were just automatically not going as planned. Karen started hollering, "John, is that you?" Thinking the men had come in. Trying to keep her quiet, Lewis picks up a chair and he tried to hit her in the head, but it was dark. And so instead he hit the clock that was on a shelf above her head, and it fell down and stopped at 7 minutes to 1 a.m.
Oh.
And that's how they determined the exact time
Yeah.
that the crime started.
Wow.
Marin's in the next room, and she hears, of course, this crash and woke up from all the noise, and she asked her sister, "What's the matter?" She heard Karen say, "John scared me." Because she's thinking,
She
you're
still
waking
doesn't
out
know.
of dead sleep, and they're expecting the men to come home anyway. So at that point, Marin got out of bed thinking her husband was home. She tries to open the door from the bedroom, but Wagner had locked it on the other side by pushing a stick through the latch.
Oh, man.
Then she heard Karen screaming, "Lewis kills me! Lewis kills me!"
Oh, no.
And she heard the sound of her sister being hit over and over and over again and screaming until she fell against the door that Marin was actually standing at, which broke open the door.
Oh, wow.
But at that point, she was worried about her sister.
Mm-hmm.
She did see a tall man at that point, but she could not make out who it was. She just grabbed Karen as quick as she could, dragged her to the bedroom, shut the door, and latched it herself
Okay.
from the inside.
And is Annetta in there too?
Annetta's in there frozen in terror. Like she literally couldn't move.
But they are all three in the room
They're
with the
all
door
three
shut.
in the room with the door shut.
Okay, good.
Marin screamed to Annetta, "Climb out the window. Go, run, get outside, run, and hide." Annetta was still just about paralyzed with fear, but she was trying to do what Marin was telling her. They had this kind of low window. She got her feet out the window and just stood outside in the snow, barefoot, with her gown on. Marin told her to scream as loud as she could so that maybe somebody on Star Island or Appledore could hear her. But Annetta just said, "I can't."
Oh, poor girl. She was really frozen with fear.
She was in shock.
Yeah. And some
So-
people do react that way.
Yeah.
I feel like I would.
So Marin started screaming herself, telling Annetta, "Run, run." But Annetta just looked at her and said, I can't move."
Oh. And is Karen dead or knocked out at this
She's
point?
not dead.
Okay.
Lewis heard the women and he ran outside.
Oh.
He came around the corner of the house and Marin heard Annetta scream, "Lewis!
Oh.
Lewis!" He walked over to Annetta with an axe
Oh, no.
that he picked up from the side of the house. Her sister-in-law is screaming and crying, "Oh, Lewis, please don't, Lewis." He raised the axe and hit her blow after blow after blow.
Oh, my gracious. That's awful.
Marin completely in shock. Can you
she's
imagine?
in that room watching that happen.
Watching. She said
After she just told her to go out the window.
she was so close she could have reached out and touched them.
Oh, gosh.
That's how close she was.
This is stressing me out a little bit
I
listening
know.
to it.
Marin turns to Karen and she says, "Please get up and let's run." But Karen moaned, "I can't."
Oh, man. What was she just...
I mean, she had been hit several
Numerous
times
times.
with that chair. And Marin knew that she was too far gone, but it was her sister.
I know. Oh.
She knew that she had to run because he was definitely going to be coming.
Mm-hmm.
And just as she was thinking that, Lewis was coming back into the house for her.
Mm.
So she climbed out the window, having to step over Annetta's dead body, barefooted. It's snowing.
Right.
Her little dog Ring is beside her, but he's not barking. I think
Okay,
he's too scared to even bark.
And I was thinking he's probably giving away her location, but okay.
She looks back and sees that Wagner has a lamp lit and that he's looking for her.
Oh, man.
So she ran to the cove because she was thinking he's got a boat. I'll go to an island, but the boat wasn't there. He put it up on the other side. So she's thinking, what in the world am I going to do? Now, there was another cottage that had been there from people that had lived there years ago. And she thought, I'll go hide in one of them. But she thought, you know what? Ring is going to bark and he's going to
Give me away.
He's going to give me away. But her life was saved because had she done that, there were tracks the next day where he had gone up and looked all in those. So she was thinking, what am I going to do? And then she heard her sister, Karen, screaming, and she knew he was killing her.
Oh.
Marin crouched down and hid in the rocks of the shoreline, nearly freezing to death. All she had was her dog. Wagner searched the island for Marin, but he wasn't able to find her. You know, he was pressed for time himself.
Because those men are coming back.
Well, yeah, and he had to get back. I mean, you know, if he's gone, it's not going to look good for him.
Right. He's got to have an alibi, too.
Right. He's got to get back. This is the crazy thing. He went back into the house, brewed himself a pot of tea.
Okay, that's weird.
Ate some of the food that the women had cooked before turning the place upside down, looking for the money that he believed was hidden in the cottage. And he was under the impression that there were $600 there.
And why was he under that impression?
He had heard John talking.
Probably knew like where he kept it and kind of had an idea. It is just the grace of God that he didn't see her.
Oh my goodness, I'm telling you. He looked everywhere. But he ended up, after all of that, he rode away with a whopping $15. Yes.
Oh, good gracious.
Early the next morning, George Ingerbretson found Marin and took her to Appledore Island where he lived. She told him everything that had happened. So him and some other men looked all over, but he was gone. When John, Matthew, and Ivan came back, they were the first ones into the cottage, and they found that sweet little beautiful Annetta hacked up where John had dragged her back into the house. She was actually in the kitchen, and then poor old Karen, her body was in the bedroom where her sister had been forced to leave her.
And I wonder why he dragged that other one back in.
I don't know.
I can't think of a reason for him to
I
have
can't
done that.
either.
No, I got a question back up to when the neighbor came and helped her. Mm-hmm. What made him come over there? And
she was screaming.
Okay, so he came across.
No, she did wait though. She waited until she knew for sure she waited until daylight.
Okay.
To start yelling because she didn't know how far away he was or if he was just pretending to be gone. And actually what I think happened was she started screaming and got the attention of some young boys that were out on the water, and then they went and got him.
Okay.
And of course, Ivan was absolutely devastated.
Oh, it was his wife and his sister.
Right. John, of course, he rushes to Appledore and so grateful that his wife was still alive. Wagner returned to the boarding house that he's been staying at. He changed out of his bloody clothes, shaved his facial hair.
I'm wondering if he thinks he's going to get away with this.
Oh, yeah. And then he fled to Boston, where he bought himself some new shoes and a new suit. The authorities found him with some women at a boarding house and ended up taking him in. He didn't really go that far away. He only went to Boston.
To Boston.
Yeah.
Which he was known to have lived there before.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just like, no, I did not do this. They were my friends. I have no reason to do this. Marin, of course, she testified.
I was going to say, he had to have known, you did leave one alive, and she knows it was you.
Exactly. So he was held for trial in Alfred, Maine. Well, first of all, these people wanted to kill him.
Right.
They could not believe how gruesome, they just felt so bad. They were just good, hardworking, just gentle people.
Right.
And people were mad.
Yeah.
So anyway, the only evidence, I guess, besides Marin's testimony, it was circumstantial, but there was a lot of it. Like, for one thing, they found Karen. She had this $50 that she always carried with her, and they found that on him, as well as a button from Annetta's dress, which was like a rare button.
Huh.
Also, he had gotten rid of a blood-soaked shirt before going to Boston. Now, he says that shirt was not his.
I think all of that is some pretty compelling evidence, even if it is circumstantial.
Oh, I think so too. And then also, like I had said, the next day they found his blood-soaked footprints in the snow going all over the place. In those buildings, looking for her, going back down, returning to the boat. His defense, they tried to turn the entire thing around on Marin, literally accusing her of murdering her own sister and sister-in-law.
Insert eye roll here.
I know, it's disgusting. But of course, the jury did not go for it.
Good.
And thankfully, he was found guilty. But before sentencing, Wagner escapes from prison and lets out some other prisoners as well. Instead of trying to get away, it's weird because, you would think he would flee, like get out of there, no, he just like hangs out around there and just eats food and hangs out in the woods. And
that's the second time he doesn't seem that smart.
It's weird. Anyway, so he was out for a whopping 4 days before he got recaptured. So he was found guilty, but he hadn't been sentenced yet.
Okay.
But when he got back, he was sentenced to death by hanging. Wagner maintained his innocence for 2 years while he was in prison. And believe it or not, he gained a lot of support. Yes, people just did not believe he looked or behaved like an axe murderer. He looked sweet. And of course, he had never been religious before, but suddenly he's carrying around a Bible all the time and maintaining that authorities had the wrong man. He cried all the time, claiming to have loved the Honvets, that he had, they had treated him like family, which was true. But he was just saying, I could never have done this to them. I loved them. They were like my family.
And the people that are believing him, I'm like, well, what does an axe murderer look like?
Exactly.
It's never anybody you think it's going to be. I mean,
no. But they were really trying to save his life. It's weird that he had so much support, but he did. People thought that maybe she did it, which she had no motive.
No.
He had every motive.
Yes.
And two, why would he have left? Why would he have shaved? How did he get money for new shoes and a new suit of clothes?
Yeah, that's like the Scott Peterson case,
that drives me
the Scott and Lacey.
Insane.
And there are people that believe he is innocent. The Innocence Project is looking into his case. But I'm just like, okay, so why would he have, dyed his hair and done all the things he was going to do, like he was getting ready to run? And there's just too much there. Yeah, I fully believe he is guilty.
And the Mendez brothers as well.
Yeah.
I think they're guilty as sin.
Yeah. Well, they are guilty. I think their motive is just, are you talking about Eric and his brother that killed their parents?
Oh, I don't think they were sexually abused. I think they were little spoiled brats. No, I don't.
Oh, well, no, we got to talk about this later. Because I'm like, I think they were.
No, I do not.
Sorry to hijack your, go ahead.
But finally on June 25th in 1875, Louis Wagner was hanged for the murder of Annette and Karen Christensen.
Good.
I think that was a very fitting ending. Sadly, this is so sad. Matthew, John's brother, ended up being killed at sea.
Oh.
And then he brought another brother over who was killed at sea.
Oh, goodness.
And then Marin's brother, Ivan, he ended up going back to Norway. He was devastated.
I'm sure.
A few years later now, Marin and John ended up having a child together, but she actually ended up leaving him. And she went back to Norway, and he got married again and had a child with someone else.
I wonder if that had a part in it.
I'm sure.
Because, when you go through times that's the most devastating thing. Sometimes your marriage doesn't survive it. So
yeah.
That's very sad.
So sad. Oh, I hated to hear that so much.
Yeah. There's a lot of loss in one family, too.
A lot. Yeah. And it's just so sad that Smuttynose, which is such a beautiful place, now it's known for that dark, terrible night.
Mm.
Now Smuttynose is privately owned and maintained by volunteers. You can actually visit during the daylight hours during summer and fall, and you have to have some kind of small boat, like a rowboat or a kayak, to get there. You can walk around, and they do have some really pretty walking trails, and you can see the site of where the house was because it's not there anymore. But the other house that was there, it's still there. It's actually very beautiful. I've personally never been there, but it's on my dream bucket list. You can't stay the night, though. There's no camping. There's not even any public restrooms or pavilions for shelter.
I bet people do go out there and camp, though.
I'm sure.
Don't you think?
I'm sure.
Yeah.
The landscape is a lot like it would have been 150 years ago when the Honvets lived there. Wow. And I like the thought of that.
Yeah. It hasn't been developed and all of that. Wow.
Yeah.
That's sad.
It is.
Those sure were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
When I read the names of these islands, Appledore, Smuttynose, Malega, Star, Lunging, I figured the folks that named them were either drunk or in kindergarten. And it made me think about a documentary that I saw when I was 8 years old about a group of kids that went exploring in these same islands and found the body of famous explorer Chester Copperpot, and allegedly found the hidden treasure of notorious pirate One-Eyed Willie. And the children said that a group of bandits that were in town filming a Jeep commercial stole it from them. And while there is some question about whether or not that story is completely true, one thing's for certain: every single episode of Hard Times and True Crimes is 100% true. So if you want to make sure your wife doesn't die of a broken heart because you accidentally left her on a small rocky island, you make sure you tell everybody you know, and a few people you don't, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.